Week 9 of the Church History series will deal with two things, with the aftermath of the Puritan Revolution and with the beginning of the modern era in church history in the 18th century that begins with the period known as the Enlightenment. These are dealing then with units 40 through 44. In Unit 40, we'll talk about the Restoration in England, which is a period of time that begins in 1660 and runs through 1668. It's the period in which, as the name implies, the Church of England is restored to its pre-Puritan status. The Puritan Revolution comes to a crashing halt in 1658 with the death of Oliver Cromwell, their great political leader. When he dies, Puritans just don't know what to do. They don't have a form of government that they can continue on. For a brief period, they think that his son Richard will continue as kind of an uncrowned heir. But it doesn't seem to work out. And so finally, out of desperation, they call back the son of Charles I, Charles II, who then becomes the new King of England in 1660, launching this period of the Restoration. This is a time in which technically Puritanism ends in England, because Puritanism had always been about an attempt by a faction within the country to purify the Church of England from the remnants of Catholicism. But from 1660 on, Puritans are no longer a political party that in any way is attempting to purify the Church of England. Rather, they establish their own independent churches. And so they become known not as Puritans, but as dissenters or as nonconformists. So we can talk loosely then about the continuation of the spirit of Puritanism in this period. And strangely, curiously, we see a literary flowering of Puritanism during the Restoration period. And in this unit then, I look at three great Puritan writers, John Milton, John Bunyan, and Daniel Defoe, who comes slightly later in this period. At the end of the unit, I include a synopsis of John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, because I think in many ways it summarizes the Puritan spirit, the essential Puritan ideas. I highly recommend reading the book. You'll notice in this book that there are themes from Augustine, especially from the Confessions, that carry over into John Bunyan's writing. The sense that the Christian life is a life of struggle, that it's a journey that we take with God, and God's providential care is never absent from our lives. These are the kinds of themes that we see in this interesting and important book. Unfortunately for these Puritans or nonconformists, when Charles II dies, his brother becomes king, James II, who is a Roman Catholic. And like Mary before him, he attempts to restore Catholicism to England. The people of England, though, are not about to tolerate a Catholic king or a Catholic country. And so just a few years into his reign, in 1688, there's a revolution. The king is replaced by William and Mary. The revolution, because it's a fairly bloodless revolution, is known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688-89. And this is a real turning point, not only in the history of England, but in the history of the Western world. Because as a result of this revolution, we see the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. Now power would be shared for the first time constitutionally between a king and parliament. In addition to this, we see the Act of Toleration, the act which doesn't give perfect freedom and equality to the nonconformists, but allows them toleration. So now they're able to build their churches and to preach their word as they see fit. In Unit 41, we backtrack a little bit and we look at Puritanism in the North American colonies that would become the United States. We look at them exclusively in the 17th century. It's interesting that the American colonies were established in the 17th century. If they had been established in the 16th century, America would have been launched by Roman Catholics. If America had been established in the 18th century, American colonies would have been established by those influenced by the Enlightenment. But instead, they're established in the 17th century. So the first Americans then were the sons and daughters of the Puritans. And America has always been stamped by that Puritan spirit from which we started. One of the first great leaders of the Puritan cause that came to America and was the first governor of the state of Massachusetts was John Winthrop, who gave a very famous sermon in which he believed that New England, and by implication the future America, would be as a city upon a hill, a very Puritan, noble vision. In Unit 42, we move on then to the Enlightenment. Unit 42 is the first of Part 4, which deals with the modern church. And you'll notice in the online material that I've begun this section with a poem by Matthew Arnold called Dover Beach, which was written in 1851, in which he imagines that the sea of faith, that is the sea of Christianity that had laid across Europe for over 1,000 years, was now receding. And the great roar that people were hearing was the tide receding from Europe of religion. So in a sense, Arnold would see, and many other intellectual leaders, literary leaders of this period, were seeing that Christianity was in decline. And it was in decline specifically because of the new ideas that emerged in the 18th century that we know of today as the Enlightenment. What's taking place in the Enlightenment is that human reason is replacing faith as the authority within our culture for our beliefs and our actions. Christianity then was assaulted by many of the Enlightenment leaders, or in French, the philosophes, who thought of Christianity as a superstition. And they would replace it within their own minds with a new scientific and technological way of viewing the modern world that we would call an Enlightenment worldview, or today a post-Enlightenment worldview. In Unit 43, then, we look at the challenges, or rather the response to this Enlightenment challenge to Christianity. And there are three different ways that I'm noting in this chapter that Europeans are responding to the challenge of the Enlightenment. The first of these is a group called the Latitudinarians, which is a Latin word, latitude meaning wide or broad. Today we would simply say liberals. So these theological liberals or latitudinarians were those who were attempting to accommodate traditional Christian ideas to the new ideas that were coming into Europe at the time of the Enlightenment. Another group of people rejected Christianity altogether, but continued to believe in a benevolent deity, a deity who had created the universe, who had created the immutable laws which govern our universe, who was not in any way hostile to human beings, but was very distant from humanity, and may not in fact have been a personal God, but simply a force. And this is the position of deism. And then lastly are the conservative Christians, who in the late 17th century, early 18th century, develop a new and yet old form of Christianity called pietism. This attempt to base Christianity no longer on the rigid ideas and dogmas of the past, but on feelings and sensibilities, our sense that we are close to God, in a sense, a devotional feeling upon which to rest Christianity. In chapter 44, we move on to a great revival in the church that occurs in America and in England. In this unit, we'll look simply at what takes place in the United States. This is called this period is called the Great Awakening. In many ways, pietism failed. It didn't have the vigor that was needed to re-energize the church in the face of this great assault from the Enlightenment. But pietism combined with revivalism in the late 1830s and through 1730s and through the 1740s creates a new form of Protestantism that today we call evangelicalism. And it's on the back of this new form of Christianity that Christianity would move into the 19th and even into the 20th century. So we'll look closely then in this unit at the Great Awakening and this new form of Christianity that emerges. In the following unit, which we'll look at next week, we'll look at the British form of this, known as the Methodist Revival.